So before taking office and since, Donald Trump has had a fraught relationship with the federal judiciary. And because Trump is a prolific tweeter, we have evidence of his feelings about the courts and the issues that they take up. So here we have Trump saying that Justice John Roberts has let us down yet again, right? We need to remember him. Even though I have a very biased and unfair judge in the Trump U civil case in San Diego, I have thousands of great reviews, and I will win the case. I will win. Here we have Trump criticizing retired Justice John Paul Stevens based on a comment that he made about individuals' rights to have cell phones. But keep in mind, Justice Stevens has been retired from the court for 2 years at the point when he made this comment. Just a reminder, Ted Cruz supported liberal Justice John Roberts, who gave us Obamacare. Trump really seems to have it out for John Roberts. Congratulations to John Roberts for making Americans hate the Supreme Court because of his BS. It's perfect. But why should we care about the messages that Trump sends out regarding the judiciary? In our democratic system of government, the power of any branch of our government relies on the legitimacy bestowed upon it by the other branches and by us, the citizenry. When the President of the United States deploys messages that are critical of the judiciary, he effectively harms the only source of the judiciary's power, its legitimacy and independence in a separation of powers system. And Donald Trump gets a lot of attention for his threats to the court. But what I want to talk about today is that this isn't a new thing. What is unique, though, is that we have a greater insight into Donald Trump's feelings because of his tweets and because of his involvement in lawsuits as a businessman. In fact, his level of litigiousness may be unprecedented for modern, if not all, presidents, right? He might be the most experienced executive in dealing with the courts. So today I'm going to talk through a couple of contemporary examples that are related to this tension. His response to both the rulings related to the travel ban executive order and the backlash that he received from his own Supreme Court nominee, as well as two key historical examples of interactions between the court and the president, to demonstrate that this conflict between the branches is almost as old as our republic itself. In late January, Donald Trump signed an executive order that effectively barred all people from terror-prone countries, including Syria, from entering the United States for a period of 90 days, and suspended the United States refugee program for 120 days, with the reinstatement of the program only happening if members of the cabinet agree that applicants from those countries can be properly vetted. So since the executive order was handed down, over 50 lawsuits have been filed opposing the content of the executive order. And many judicial decisions about the executive order's provisions have come down in favor of staying or pausing the enforcement of the travel ban. In particular, a decision to pause the ban by U.S. District Court Judge James Robart, which was upheld by the 3-judge panel in the Ninth Circuit, led to a series of comments by Trump toward Justice Robart criticizing the decision. So Trump went even as far to refer to Robart as a so-called judge. So what does it mean that Trump has referred to this judge in this way? Well, this comment to me suggests that the president thinks that the office of judge is inappropriate for this person, right? He's using the fact that Judge Robart has used his position on the bench to question the president's use of power, and the president is calling into question the legitimacy of that judge's role. So I am okay with the use of the term so-called in particular situations. For example, when you are obliterating a long-standing so-called animal rivalry. Just for a little bit more context, here's Wamba the tortoise and her new hare friend. They're having a really nice time. I think this is really, really beautiful. But using this term to characterize a judge is potentially damaging to the legitimacy of the courts. it is improper to characterize a judge in this way for the decisions that they make. So this comment also led Trump's own nominee to speak out against the president. Neil Gorsuch called these comments demoralizing and disheartening, right? It hurt him that the president would try to delegitimize the courts in some way. It's not entirely uncommon for a justice to be critical of the president, but comments like these coming before a confirmation process are incredibly uncommon. Some believe that the judge's statement was strategic by making these comments seeming like he is standing up against Trump. It might actually make him more appealing to moderate lawmakers in the confirmation process. So, as we probably are also familiar with, Trump had a response to the Ninth Circuit's decision. In arguably a great American tradition, he is going to say that I will see you in court. But attacks on the judiciary and judges are far from new. From the beginning of our nation, presidents have spoken out against the judiciary and have threatened the authority and legitimacy of judges and courts. All right. So I would like to introduce you to Justice Samuel Chase and a guy that you're probably familiar with. So Samuel Chase signed the Declaration of Independence, and he was appointed to the Supreme Court by George Washington, thought of as one of these original patriots, right? So in the election of 1800, Samuel Chase was an Adams booster. That's very clever PowerPointing, thank you. Chase was rooting for John Adams to win re-election, which caused some issues between Chase and Jefferson. He's angry, right? It turns out when you have kind eyes like Thomas Jefferson, it's very hard to make him look angry, but just bear with it. Okay, so Thomas Jefferson wins the election, and Thomas Jefferson really wanted to get Federalists like Chase off of the bench. And Chase was critical of Jefferson's plan to do so by terminating federal district judges by repealing the Judiciary Act of 1801. And Jefferson's plan sort of worked. Chase was the first and only Supreme Court justice to be impeached. So he was impeached by the House, but he was acquitted by the Senate. So the trial process he was acquitted in. So to extend the logic of Trump's tweeting, I thought to myself, if Thomas Jefferson were tweeting, which I would not imagine a situation where Thomas Jefferson would ever tweet, but if he were, this is sort of what I would imagine he would be saying. Thank you. So another famous case concerns the entire Supreme Court. So in his first term, FDR became quite frustrated with a Supreme Court that wasn't supporting his New Deal legislation. And the Four Horsemen was a group of justices that were causing him problems. So they were a conservative group of 4 justices who were over the age of 70, and they sought to limit the power of the government to micromanage the economy in the wake of the Great Depression. So FDR fought back, and in 1937 he proposed a sweeping change to the court. For every justice over the age of 70, an assistant justice would be appointed to help the aging justice out. Just need a little bit of assistance when you're over 70. These assistant justices would also have full voting rights on the court, and they would also be selected by the president. So at the time that the court packing plan was proposed, we could have seen an additional 6 justices on the Supreme Court. So FDR was not successful in convincing Congress that this was a good idea, but perhaps not coincidentally, the Supreme Court started to relax its approach to New Deal legislation. So this is, thank you. So given that presidential attacks on the judiciary aren't new, Trump is actually a part of a presidential pattern that started almost at the founding of our country. But what is different about Trump, and why should we take note of his behavior? So Trump is the first president that's actually had a pre-presidency life on social media. We know about Trump's feelings about the courts long before he becomes a presidential candidate. And some have even speculated that Trump's uncensored and outspoken feelings about the travel ban have made it more difficult for judges to ignore the intended effects of the executive order. So I just have a couple of examples of tweets that are sort of surrounding the executive order, which again give a little bit more perspective to how Trump is feeling about the courts, right? Cannot believe that a judge would put our country into such peril. If something happens, blame him and the court system, right? It's the judiciary's fault if something happens. The threat from radical Islamic terrorism is very real. The courts must act fast, right? He's asking the courts to do something that's favorable to him. And then finally, I've instructed Homeland Security to check people coming into our country very carefully. The courts are making this job very difficult, right? He's using his online presence, his social media presence, to be critical of the courts, and this is a new thing for American democracy. Also, Trump is probably the president who has the most experience with the judiciary. At last count, he's been party to over 4,000 lawsuits. So what does this mean? If he's had unfavorable experiences with the courts in the past, he may continue to be critical of them into the future. And conflict between these branches is nothing new, but the way that Trump approaches his relationship with the courts is unique given the context in which his criticism is generated. So further, Trump is in a position to nominate over 118 judicial vacancies held over from the Obama administration, and he's potentially in a position to nominate more judges as judges retire or leave the bench throughout his presidency. If a president is hostile toward the current bench, it may make it more difficult for political scientists to guess who he's going to pick to elevate to these positions. But even through all of this uncertainty and all of this hostility, it's important for all of us to remember that we've been here before. Presidents like Roosevelt and Jefferson have also expressed their discontent with the judiciary, and in those cases, the judiciary held the trump card. An appeal to their legitimacy and their independence, right? And by having those things in their back pocket, they can effectively preserve their role in a separation of power system. Thank you.